So, for those of you who have been here a lot, you'll know some of this, and it's about transitions, starting with an ending, and starting with ending of some kind of phase of your life, and then there's a stage of in-between, neutral zone, and then the stage of beginning something new, and those often overlap or mix together in different ways, and they're not totally distinct, but it's a helpful perspective that we've been exploring in this class. And so today is the day that we focus on beginnings. No, you're fine. But one reason to start with this slide is because you really can't talk about beginnings without remembering the endings in the neutral zone, right?
That's right. Yeah, like we talked about, I guess 3 or 4 weeks ago when we talked about endings, really the quality of your ending affects the quality of your new beginning. Because if you are still holding on to the previous stage of your life, to your old habits, to your old ways of doing things, to not wanting to invest in a new beginning, then you're going to basically and we'll talk about this more a little bit later, but you're basically causing yourself to not have a good new beginning. And if you're holding on to grudges, if you're holding on to anger against someone in your previous stage of life, then you carry that baggage with you into your new beginning. And even though you feel like you moved across the country, you got away from the people you're angry at, you're still holding on to those feelings, and they affect your new relationships. They affect your new attitudes in your new place.
Or if you didn't end well, like you had senioritis.
Right, exactly. If you don't finish well in your old stage of life, then that affects your new beginning also. And so all of those things in the ending affect your new beginning. And we've seen some people who are in their new beginning having to go back and kind of end things mentally that they hadn't really let go of because they realize that they're not investing in their new beginning because they didn't end well, whatever it was that they have left behind. And so the ending affects the beginning. And so we have to talk about that again a little bit, just because sometimes people have trouble in their beginnings because of things that they didn't finish well, or because of things that they didn't end well. And then they have to go back and say goodbye, or let go of things that they haven't really let go of. And then the neutral zone, that middle stage, so you start with an ending in your transition. You go into a neutral zone stage where usually that's the place where you just really don't know what's going on. We called it chaos, or the bridge, or the or wilderness, or the desert. And we talked about how similar it is to the wilderness wanderings for Israel, and also Jesus' time, him going into the desert intentionally, kind of going into an intentional neutral zone before he began his ministry. And that's a time when you're kind of clearing the ground. You're putting your dependence in God. You're seeking Him. You're trusting Him. You don't really know what way you're going for, what way to go forward, and it's a time when you can really invest in your relationship with Him. But almost every transition has a component of neutral zone when you're not really sure what's going on. You're not really sure where you are. You're not really sure where you're going forward, and so that's that middle component. And if you've done your work well of your ending and your neutral zone, then your beginning is going to go a lot better because you've established that confidence in your relationship with God, that dependence on Him during the neutral zone. You've let go of the previous things that might not work for you in your new beginning. And so then you're able to make kind of a clean beginning here.
I would add that, what she's saying is totally true for most of us, but then there's some of us that will get stuck in try and do the ending so well, can't do the beginning, or try to do the neutral zone so well that we can't move over into the beginning. So that's another temptation we have to guard against.
Right.
Beginnings happen after any change. Obviously, after a move, you have a new beginning. That one's pretty clear. But what about a loss? You lose an arm. Where's the new beginning, right? But there is one. You have to look for it. A career transition, maybe a school change, or retirement, or an age transition. puberty or menopause or who knows what, a relationship transition, they all involve new beginnings. We have to look for them and make sure we find them.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have anything to say about that? All right, when a transition is not welcome, then sometimes we're in denial. We're like, I don't want a new beginning. I never asked for this. I'm not interested in this. And so we can miss it just for closing our eyes to it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've actually seen people sabotage their new beginning because they didn't want to let go of what they'd left behind. And that can be true for, like, we've seen it with kids that were forced to move by their parents. You know, they didn't want to leave their old school. They didn't want to leave their old friends. And so they get to the new place and they're like, I'm not going to like it here. You know, have you seen that happen? Yeah. And that can be true for adults too in different kinds of transitions where they didn't want to lose that person that they lost, or they didn't want to lose that job, or they didn't want to lose their health, you know, all these different things that they didn't want to lose. And they're not going to invest in their new beginning because they don't want to let go of that old thing. And they don't want to invest in thriving in their new beginning. Some people actually feel like it's a betrayal of whatever they lost. And I've seen that with kids that have moved, that they don't want to invest in the new place, in making friends, and enjoying their life there, because they feel like that's betraying the people that they love, that they left behind. And so sometimes you actually have to work through that, and you have to talk yourself through that, and you have to say, the fact that I loved this thing in the past does not mean that I can't love again something else. Doesn't mean that I can't live again in some other kind of situation. And so with these unwanted transitions, the beginnings can be very hard. And that's where a neutral zone is very helpful too, because it can give you that time that you need to really seek God and to say, okay, what next? You know, I'm missing this old thing. I wanted this old thing. It's gone now. How can I move forward? You know.
She talked about kids that move and the anger, and sometimes that anger is justified, but it still can't stop. I mean, like, sometimes it's not fair that someone moved them. Sometimes people weren't considering their needs or something like that. You can imagine the same thing, like if someone loses a loved one, right? That's a big transition. And then after you lose the loved one, sometimes you can feel guilty for enjoying yourself. You can feel guilty for having joy in your life or having happiness, because you're feeling like it's a betrayal, like you're betraying the person that you lost, right?
I think really you're talking from a human standpoint. I really think as a Christian, whatever happens, God allowed it. And I will say that and meditate and pray about it until it's my reality.
That's absolutely true. Yeah.
I will not be in those states.
Yeah. And I think that's absolutely true, and that's one of the things that we have to wrestle with and work towards, is this acceptance, going through a kind of grieving process, and then being willing to accept
the
that.
attitude we should have, but it takes a mature Christian to be at that point to realize.
Okay, but
So,
Right.
so a newer, younger Christian
Yeah.
will be going through these feelings, and the people in their
Right.
lives, the more mature Christians, are the ones that need to kind of coach them and share that perspective with them to bring them along so that they.
But I
Yeah.
thought it was important to
Yeah.
speak from
Absolutely.
that in the class, that
Yeah.
that's where
Absolutely.
the ideal
Oh,
and the reality can be.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And one thing that we bring these feelings up, that sometimes in unwanted transitions you have these feelings, because I feel like when people are prepared for them and able to recognize them, then it's so much easier to get where God wants you to be with it. When you realize, you know what? I may be feeling this way because of this, or my kid may be feeling this way, that I just moved because of this. And then suddenly you realize, okay, let's talk through this. Let's work through this. Let's seek God about it. And that's eventually you have to embrace it, and that's why that's there.
Ideal. We're dealing with flawed human beings.
That's right.
Everybody's going to be there. And
Yeah.
We're going to struggle with this.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
you can say, well, if you're a mature Christian, this is the way it should be. But we're all flawed.
Yeah.
We're not going to act the way that we're supposed to all the time.
And I would say that even for a mature Christian, that wrestling is going to happen. It's not like you're just going to sing and dance and say, ooh, I lost my loved one and now I'm going into the next stage of life, you know? I don't think anybody's going to do that. And so that wrestling, that's, yeah.
No, but God produces
Yes,
in
absolutely.
me when I seek it.
Right.
Seek to
And-
embrace whatever He's allowed.
Yeah.
I don't say cause, I say allowed.
Yeah, and so that's where that wrestling comes in. And I think that I think that that's where that wrestling comes in. And that's really what we're called to, is to wrestle with it and to try to seek God about it. So,
On the other hand, there's some transitions that seem easy because we're excited about it. We want a new beginning, and we feel like we don't need any kind of training or coaching, and we don't need to seek God about this new beginning because it's just easy. It's like falling off a log, but we still do, right? Looking at Carrie's about to, because we're going to, first of all, because God is God and we need to love Him with all of our hearts, but also because we have to deal with disappointment, other unexpected temptations that come with new beginnings. And no matter how much you think you're looking forward to it, it's still going to be a challenge. And you can't just think it's going to be easy and turn off your thinking cap.
when I think of a couple of different transitions that we've had, even getting married, we were very excited to get married. We were super pumped about getting married. And then we had a lot of problems our first 6 months, you know, and yes, we did. We really did. And so, and I don't think that I was necessarily, you know, you hear that, but you don't really expect it because you're so in love, right? I mean, and so we had to deal with some disappointments and other unexpected temptations. And there were moments when I thought to myself, hey, did I make a big mistake here? You know, this isn't going as smoothly as I was expecting it to go. And sometimes when we are looking forward to the new beginning and we're excited about it, then those temptations and those disappointments, they take us by surprise. And then we end up second guessing ourselves. And I know when we became missionaries, we were very excited about that. And we spent the first several months, it was just a great adventure. You know, we were loving getting to know the place, getting to know the people there. And then about 6 months into it, I was robbed by some men in my house. And it was terrifying. And suddenly everything that had seemed like a great adventure just seemed kind of dark. And I know we thought, hey, did we make a big mistake here? Because sometimes when you're excited about a new beginning, you're not expecting those troubles to come. And so it's good to be prepared for that and to know that that can happen.
I think the idea that in the vulnerability we have, even Jesus, the greatest example I could use, he went to the garden and he talked to God about if it's possible, don't make me do this. Don't make this happen.
That's right.
Then of course it was God's will. So that's the human side. You can't erase it happens.
Right. Talking about Jesus struggling in the Garden of Gethsemane. I'm just repeating it for the microphone in case you couldn't pick it up. Yep. All right. So when we talked about endings, we talked about the Israelites leaving Egypt. As we talked about the neutral zone, the in-between time, we talked about them in the wilderness. And now we're going to talk about them as they're about to enter the promised land of Palestine or Canaan. And we'll look in some passages in Deuteronomy, a little bit in Joshua. So habits. Deuteronomy chapter 6. Let's see if I can get into some good place to read this. Chapter 6, at the beginning it says, in the land you are about to enter. So they're about to have this new beginning and so much potential. So much that can be done in a new beginning, right? You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. You must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands that I am giving you today. Repeat them again and again to your children. He's talking about good habits you can get into. Talk about them when you're at home and when you're on the road, when you're going to bed and when you're getting up. Tie them to your hands, wear them on your forehead as reminders. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So when you are experiencing a transition, see it as an opportunity. Habits are so powerful in our lives. I know for me, without habits, I just can't survive. The only way I get through life is by having routines. And by, because if I have to think about everything I do, then I'm just lost. But if I just know, this is what I do first thing when I wake up, this is what I do second, this is what I do third, then I'm all right. But if those habits are bad habits, then I'm in big trouble, right? So a new beginning is such a good time and an important time to make sure we're getting into good habits from the very beginning. Do you have anything to say about that?
No, we'll talk about this more later.
Yeah, okay. Temptations. There's potential for good, there's also potential for bad when you enter a new place, right? So Deuteronomy 6 continues, you must not worship any of the gods of neighboring nations, for the Lord your God who lives among you is a jealous God. His anger will flare up against you and he will wipe you from the face of the earth. Before I read the rest of it, I just want the reality to sink in that we are not just perfect people. We have to make that choice to do right and to follow God. And the temptation to go against God, to fight God, to be God's enemy is real. And, at that time, those other gods were really tempting to the people. The next chapter, I believe, says don't even take the gold from those idols because it's going to be a temptation to you. And, we go into a place, and when we first enter a new phase of our lives, it's pretty easy to see the bad things that people are doing. It's easy because you're coming in from an outsider's perspective, and you think to yourself, I will never be tempted by that. But you will. So take it seriously, right? Because once you get acclimatized to the new normal, whatever it is, then you will fall into the same traps that other people have fallen into unless your heart is fully with God. So really pay attention to those temptations and run away from them. And set guards for yourself and make sure that you are not putting yourself in the way of that temptation.
And this is where it's really helpful to talk to people who've been through a similar transition. People who are newly married need to talk to people who've been married for a while. Find out what are the temptations, what are the things I need to watch out for. People who are having a baby need to talk to people who have had, children and find out what kind of temptations am I going to run into and be prepared for those because they happen.
As Lisa Welsh says, always stay one step ahead of where you are. Always be talking
That's
to
right.
the people in the next stage, wherever that may be. And, You must not test the Lord your God as you did when you complained at Massah. Complaining is a very bad habit that's easy to get into when you go into a different stage of your life as you transition. And it's one that you really have to guard against. And if I could find a green marker, I was going to make a little plant, but instead I made a bird. And this bird makes me think about bonding. Are you my mama? That, whatever they focus on first as they come out of the egg, and they bond with that mother, right? And that's because when you have a new beginning in your life and in animals too, you're very malleable. You're that wet clay that's not yet hardened, right? And it's a great time to be humble and to relearn how to live. And to, Jesus talked about baptism. We've talked about baptism as being like an ending, or it can also be like a beginning. Jesus called it being born again. And he was telling this powerful leader, you have to be like a baby again. And that's hard for a leader to think about being, right? A person who thinks they know how to live and what to do and how to lead. And to think about becoming like a baby and just relearning things. And you can learn a lot from the new people in your life. If this new transition involves having new people, then those early weeks are a really important time for bonding with them. and being thankful to God for the good that you see in them. Later, you're going to see the bad side, and you're going to struggle with that and try to hold on to that love that you had for them. But it's going to be easier if you go ahead and embrace people when it's easy. When you're in that bonding, malleable stage, find things to like about people. Find things to like about your new situation. Maybe it's not even people. Maybe it's just a new way of getting along in the world. Maybe it's new surroundings. Find things to enjoy. Find things to like. Don't be just a complainer, right? God is giving you gifts. God is leading you in green pastures and by still waters. Take time to notice it. Take time to realize what God is doing for you. Confidence, Deuteronomy 7. Don't be afraid of them. Just remember what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh. So it's talking about they're scared of the people that they're going to be facing. They're scared of enemies. It says, you saw it all with your own eyes. Remember the miraculous signs and wonders, the strong hand and powerful arm with which he brought you out of Egypt. So God has already saved them from this slavery, and God is still with them. The Lord your God will use the same power against all the people you fear. Do not be afraid of those nations, for the Lord your God is among you, and he is a great and awesome God. Why does God keep telling them not to be afraid? Fear. Yeah, because they're afraid.
Yeah.
What's wrong with being afraid?
No, because God is God.
God is God.
He's faithful.
Definitely. Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, you're welcome. Yeah.
And why?
Sometimes may I share real quick?
Yeah.
Because sometimes I feel people don't think I live in reality. But I'm going to tell you, this last week I realized the one that owns the house I live in is in his upper 60s. And it dawned on me, the house is probably not going to be there for me forever because of the age difference. Do you understand? My home's gone. It scared the living daylight. So, man, I said, God, what am I going to do? And he instantly said, Karen, you could go to a motel for a while. There will be, and we just talk. So now I'm okay with it. The house is going to be gone, probably, most likely. But I don't have the fear. See, so I had those things in my life, but I worked through them, God.
Right.
And I talked.
Right. You had a fear that you would lose your house, and you worked through it and
Because he would die
realized you could trust
over,
God.
and I would-
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Fear.
Not that old. No, I'm just saying, I may be there another 10 years. But
All right.
the age gap, that's what I'm saying.
Right. Right. Okay. Fear can cripple our beginnings. Right. And we have to find the confidence in God. And it can't just be imagined. It's not just like believing in yourself regardless of what's real. It's talking about finding something real to base your faith on, and to find real strength in God, and to be able to face the future. Sometimes we'll continue to talk about this principle as we go along, but fear can really make us get stuck in the neutral zone or in the endings. Fear can make us go the wrong way when we have potential to really serve and really make a difference in our new beginnings. Fear can stop us from doing that, right? Yeah, Jim.
I think it's a really key point I think that you're making. Just saying. Oh, it is. Fear is so crippling, and there's a saying, you need to face your fears, and I think that there's wisdom in that. To I guess the way I would frame that is that, what am I actually afraid of? So you're in this neutral zone or this new beginning or whatever it is. Like, what am I really afraid of? And to name it, and
Right.
to identify it, and to process it, and pray about it, and all that. And I think fear is the companion of worry, and there's many passages that tell us not to worry. So I think it's a really key point that you guys are making, is that fear is incredibly crippling, and we allow, and I think it's a tool of Satan to keep us from reaching our potential in whatever arena. So
Yeah.
glad you guys are sharing that.
Yep.
Absolutely right. And we've seen so many people that have gotten stuck by fear, partly because there are so many choices in our lives, and so sometimes people are afraid to make a choice because they're like, "What? I'm going to be missing on all of these." We've known people who waitressed for years, which waitressing is a great thing. It provides for your family. If you like it, great. But she didn't like it. But she was just afraid to choose a career, and so she waitressed for years. Even though it wasn't a job that she liked. Because she was afraid to choose something because of all the other things that she wouldn't get to do if she chose that thing. And so that's a fear that can keep you from a new beginning because you're afraid of choosing wrong or you're afraid of missing out or all of those things. That's another kind of fear that can happen. Roy, did you have something to say?
Here, I can get it.
I think one of the fears is fear of failure.
Mm-hmm.
When we go into a new place, we're afraid we might not succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And so that makes us hesitate to make a choice. And so I think fear of failure is, and I know as a Christian that shouldn't be one of your fears, because God is able to do things beyond what we can imagine. But putting ourselves out there and trusting Him to take care of us when we make those choices, sometimes we'll hesitate to do that because we're afraid we may fail.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And what Marcus talked about earlier about humility, I think people who are doing job changes, and we'll talk about work changes in I think about 3 weeks or so, but people who have been really good at a job and are going into a new job where they have to learn and be like starting out again and feeling that failure or feeling that sense of incompetence, that can be a fear that keeps you from going forward with your new beginning and being successful with it. Rebecca, did you have something to say?
When my daughter was going into 9th grade, we had lived in Littleton since she was in 2nd grade. We moved her to Texas, and I was really concerned about her going into the 9th grade in a big school. And I worried about it and worried, I'll be okay. And by the end of the first week, she came home. It is so great being the new kid in school. So all my worrying was for nothing.
Right. Yeah, a lot of our worry is about things that are never going to happen. Yes, that's right. Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, so now we're going to move into Deuteronomy 8, which is still him coaching them into this new beginning because they're in the wilderness still, but they're about to go into the promised land. All right? And he's giving them this advice about how to do their new beginning well. Okay? And so here we have him talking about remembering. Remember how the Lord your God led you through the wilderness for these 40 years. And remember how we compared that to the neutral zone, that wilderness time, where they didn't really have a great clear sense of direction. They were just wandering around in the wilderness. And he had purpose in that time. And that's something we really need to remember through all the stages of transition. God has purpose in that. And we need to recognize that and know that he is at work. So he was humbling them. He was testing them to prove their character, to find out whether or not they would obey his commands. He humbled them by letting them go hungry. And yes, that happens sometimes. And then feeding them with manna, a food previously unknown to you and your ancestors. He did it to teach you that people do not live by bread alone. Rather, we live by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And so you see how he was developing that dependence on him through all of those stages of transition. He was developing their sense of his provision. And when he talks about, he was teaching them that man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. You know, we talk about that a lot in relation to the Bible. And I love the Bible, and I really think that that's part of this here. But it's also about the fact that he gives a command, he gives a word now, and we are provided for. And so he gave the command for manna. Manna happened, and they were fed. And so God is active right now in our lives, giving us that provision when we need it. And so we live by not just bread alone, but by God's words that command into our lives everything that we need. And so that was one of the lessons of the neutral zone, of the wilderness. And it's also a lesson of that new beginning. But we need to remember God's provision. I'm a big fan of like journaling through transitions. recording your fears and God's provision. And that's something that you can do in order to look back and remember, for all those 40 years, your clothes didn't wear out and your feet didn't blister or swell. And remember that God had provided for you in all of those times. So obey the commands of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and fearing him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land of flowing streams and pools of water, with fountains and springs that gush out in the valleys and hills. It is a land of wheat and barley, of grapevines, fig trees and pomegranates, olive oil and honey. It is a land where food is plentiful and nothing is lacking. A land where iron is as common as stone and copper is abundant as the hills. In the hills, when you have eaten your fill, be sure to praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. And so those are also things that we need to think about in our new beginnings. We need to think about obedience to God. Make sure that our actions in our new context are aligning with his will. And then we also need to remember to praise him for every gift along the way, for all of the provision that's going to happen in this new beginning. And nurture that attitude of thanksgiving and prayer. But that is the time to be careful. And he has this warning here, because I've seen new beginnings in a lot of people's lives be a time when they let down their guard and they allow themselves to drift away from God. He says that is a time to be careful. Beware that in your plenty you do not forget the Lord your God and disobey his commands, regulations, and decrees that I'm giving you today. So you see, in a new beginning, at the beginning, you're going to feel at sea, you're going to feel maybe insecure and all those things, but then as you progress in that beginning, you're going to get more and more confident. You're going to have that provision. You're going to see that you're going to become more comfortable, right? And what's the danger there?
Forgetting God.
Forgetting God, absolutely. Often when we feel insecure, we're desperate for him. We're clinging on to him, right? We go into a phase of life where we're becoming more secure in our surroundings, more secure in our stage, and then we might forget him. When you become full and prosperous and have built fine homes to live in, and when your flocks and herds have become very large and your silver and gold have multiplied along with everything else, be careful. Do not become proud at that time and forget the Lord your God, who rescued you from slavery in the land of Egypt. Do not forget that he led you through the great and terrifying wilderness with its poisonous snakes and scorpions, where it was so hot and dry. He gave you water from the rock. He fed you with manna in the wilderness, a food unknown to your ancestors. He did this to humble you and test you for your own good. He did all this so you would never say to yourself, I have achieved this wealth with my own strength and energy. And it's amazing how quickly we can fall into that, We are praying, oh God, I don't know where I'm going to get the next, bread. I don't know where we're going to get food. I don't know all of these things. And then a few years into your profession, and you're doing great. I'm doing great, right?
Because I'm smart.
Right. Doing really well, and we start to get proud. And we start to think that we've achieved it by our own strength and energy. Remember the Lord your God. He is the one who gives you power to be successful in order to fulfill the covenant he affirmed to your ancestors with an oath. And so, that's something going into a new beginning is good to keep in mind. It's good to keep in mind, how am I not going to fall into that trap? That when I get comfortable, I'm going to get complacent in my faith. And I'm going to get complacent in my relationship with God. Let's see here. I'm going to go. I wanted to mention something that we did, just as a practical kind of idea. And I brought, like I said, I journal a little bit during transitions especially. And I wanted to read to you an excerpt from my journal from when we were about to move here. Today I realized that my husband is officially unemployed. That doesn't really worry me, but it did make me want to sit down and think. Simply because unemployment is a mile marker on our transition journey. I feel like we're releasing what we have little by little, belongings, jobs, schools, friends, and soon it will be just ourselves, stripped down, and God. Except for our clothes and a few other items, our possessions are packed and have already begun their journey. They will sit in Marcus's granny's garage in Texas for a few months until they're wanted again. Over the next 2 months, we will finish our last 3 weeks in Arkansas, visit relatives in Missouri, head to Tennessee for a family vacation and a friend's wedding, fly to Australia and Papua New Guinea, and back to Tennessee, And then we will drive to Denver, where we have absolutely nothing and nobody waiting for us but Jesus. I am realizing that he is all we really need waiting for us. Of course, I've said that all along, but there is a theoretical knowledge that comes from reading the Bible, and there is an experiential knowledge that comes from living it. I have said all along that I trust in him, but we always had friends, family, job, school, and church. Something was there to make that trust a little easier to act upon. It is exciting and humbling to think that my faith is going to be tested a little more than before. God clothes the lilies of the field and feeds the birds of the air. And will he not care for me? How much do I believe that? At what point would I stop believing it? As we sent our possessions to Texas, I was shocked at both how much and how little we own. We have a whole small trailer full of things: toys, winter clothes, a couple of bicycles, a love seat and a chair, a card table, and 4 folding chairs. We have 1 mug. We have 1 mason jar. We have pillows, but no pillowcases. We have a blanket, but no beds. The possessions are nice to have, but part of me realizes that if something were to happen to them, I probably wouldn't miss them. They don't make up the substance of my life. Relationships do. And our relationships are what we find it hard to leave. In some ways, I feel we go to Denver with empty cups. Here we have friends, church family, and people who make us feel loved and valued. In Denver, we have no home, no job, no church family. Our eyes are on God to fill our cup. This was before we got a call from the Rigsbys saying that we could live in their house, by the way. I told my 4 children that when they are sitting alone in their new school's cafeterias and they're missing Bethany, Lily, Esperanza, and their other friends from here, they should hold their empty cup out to God and let him know that they wait for him to fill it. Anyway, so we got this kind of jar type thing, and it was empty when we came. And as we saw the provision of God, we wrote on a slip of paper what he'd provided for us that day. And the kids did at first sit alone in their cafeterias and wish that they had friends to sit with and things like that. But then when they had a friend to sit with, they wrote that name in a jar and they put it in here. And some of you are in this jar. Some of you are in this jar a few times. And as I was looking through it, I put on the bottom a check just in case you all wanted to look at it. This is a check from the Good Samaritan Ministry. We just passed that bag around. But soon after we got here, somebody realized that we didn't have any beds, and they gave us some money, thought that maybe we should buy some mattresses or something. Anyway, but all of the provision of God, we tried to put it in here. And as I was kind of looking through it a little bit, I saw this written by my Faith a couple years ago. It says, misspelled and with terrible handwriting, "We have friends." And so sweet, to see the provision of God and to be able to go through this jar and to remember that it was him all along, and that it wasn't by your own strength, wasn't by your own power, but that everything was a gift, and everything is a gift. And that was 2 years ago that we moved here, 2 years ago this month. And so this is our jar, and we don't really put things in it that much anymore, but it sits on our mantle as a reminder of God's provision that our jar is full, and we came with it empty. So.
Yeah, I wanted us to see the beginning. If you read the book of Joshua, they had a pretty good transition. They had maybe an Achilles heel that would continue to plague them as time went on, and in later classes we'll look at some of that. But for now, I want us to see an interesting story, a miracle story. God promised that there would be this miracle, and it says the people left their camp to cross the Jordan, and the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. So the Jordan was the border to the promised land for them. That was kind of a big moment of entering. And unfortunately, it was flooded. It says it was the harvest season, and the Jordan was overflowing its banks. But he told the priests to go on ahead of them and to put their feet in the water. So as soon as the feet of the priests who were carrying the ark touched the water at the river's edge, the water above that point began backing up a great distance away to a town called Adam, which is near Zarethan. And the water below that point flowed on down to the Dead Sea till the riverbed was dry. Then all the people crossed over near the town of Jericho. And I thought that's a really good picture of our beginnings, that they can seem impossible, but we just have to get our feet wet, right? We have to go ahead and get our toes in the water and not be afraid of those beginnings. And we'll see God's power, we'll see God's provision in our lives.
That's a great image.
Yeah.
Put my foot out there and God will dry up the water. God, see
Yeah.
that, dry up the water.
Yeah, it is a great image. Yeah. So, thinking about these scriptures we've looked at and thinking about any other principles you may know about, why don't you help us to think about ways to begin well?
You want to ride, or do you want to take
Sure.
a ride around?
I
Okay.
can,
So this can be habits that are good to get into in a new context. These can be ways to remember God. These can be ways to thrive in a new situation. What are some ways to begin well? Anybody?
We tend to forget that reading God's Word is what got us where we are. And when we get focused on all of the stresses and strains of making a transition, and we forget to read God's Word, which reminds us of what He's done for His people and what He will always do for His people.
Absolutely. And I find myself having to get into new habits with every little transition in my life. When the kids are in school, I have a habit of reading the Bible at a certain time, and then all of a sudden the kids are out of school and it's summertime, and wow, where'd that habit go? And I have to figure out a whole new routine, but it's something I have to think about with every transition. When am I going to do that? When am I going to read the Bible? When am I going to read the Bible every day so that I keep feeding my soul? And so that's a good habit to begin well. Anything back here?
Focus on the things you can control and don't worry about the things you can't.
Trying to concentrate on not worrying about things that are beyond your control. Do the things that you can.
Talk to God, gut level honesty. We can call it prayer, but I find it a lot easier, eyes open, looking up, and just because to Him I can be the very most honest and get at really what's my problem, what my hang-ups are, and then ask for Him, and He will answer. So that is a very important continuing time, meaning daily, ongoing.
Absolutely. So talk to God. Mm-hmm.
I think it's important that you have confidence in God as you move forward and look to the future as an adventure and not with dread.
Absolutely. Yeah. Nurturing that confidence that we have in God. I've actually written letters to myself in boxes that I've packed to be opened later when I open them to remind myself of that, to have confidence in God, because I knew I'd be feeling that way when I opened those boxes.
Having the people in your confidants, the people that really could be family, could be just close friends or whatever, can be hard if you're moving like you guys to a whole new place where you don't know anybody. But leaning on the people that know you best, because I think it's easy to get blind. You're in this new thing, and you can get blinded to maybe starting some bad habits or just forgetting to rely on God. Some of the stuff we've already talked about. So just it's your posse, it's your people, the people that have your back, to really lean on them in those at that starting point.
Absolutely. That's great. And even with, like, for us, we've moved, and every time that we moved, we found a church family first, because before we found anything else, really, before we got the kids enrolled in school or anything else, because we know we need those relationships to people to worship with, people to pray with, people to confess to, people to confide in, and people to tell us when we're wrong. We need that.
I think we need to learn to say yes. When I first came here, I think the first people I met was you and Marcus, and you invited me to your house that Tuesday for a life group. And my first reaction was to say, no, I can't drive. I don't have a way. And you said, we'll take care of that. And you had somebody pick me me up, and you're still picking me up. So saying yes when you first go somewhere to meet somebody, and that because today is my 1 year anniversary of moving here, so I still don't know near as many people as I'd like to, but
Well, we're glad that you're here, and we're glad you said yes.
Life is sort of like driving a car. Go ahead and put your foot on the pedal and get going. Remember, there is a brake. There is a reverse. So you don't have to be perfect in your awareness of this is it. Just trust. We trust cars. They're not going to quit. God's a whole lot more trustworthy than that.
Write something or just do it, or
There you go. Anybody else?
Get going.
do you want to share what you have on your slide?
Yeah,
there?
I went ahead and put some down, like just things that I thought of, and of course, I think most of these are covered here. Worship with a community of faith. I think that that's so important, and I want to say something about that right now, and also with the meeting for confession, prayer, and learning from others, schedule time for meditation, prayer, and Bible reading. That, I've heard so many people say, "Oh, God's not taking attendance," at church services or stuff like that, and I feel like that's totally